Terry Gilliam's 1981 fantasy epic Time Bandits isn't just a beloved cult classic, it's one of cinema's strangest productions, filled with behind-the-scenes drama, bizarre accidents, and creative decisions that defy explanation. From a Beatles legend who financed it while feuding with the director, to actors who couldn't swim risking their lives for stunts, to a script joke that accidentally landed Sean Connery, this film's production was as wild as its time-traveling plot. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Time Bandits. Fact 1. George Harrison's passive-aggressive end credits song. When the credits roll on Time Bandits, audiences hear a charming song called Dream Away, performed by former Beatles guitarist George Harrison, who also served as the film's executive producer through his company, Handmade Films. What most viewers don't realize is that this seemingly whimsical tune was actually Harrison's way of calling out director Terry Gilliam for his behavior during the production, using music to express frustrations he couldn't voice directly. Harrison had originally wanted to write multiple songs for Time Bandits, potentially turning it into more of a musical experience, but Gilliam strongly opposed this idea and fought against it throughout post-production. The two clashed repeatedly, with producer Dennis O'Brien caught in the middle, trying to mediate between the stubborn director and the legendary musician who was funding the entire project. Gilliam later admitted he became so frustrated that he started screaming at O'Brien, calling him an idiot for repeatedly pushing Harrison's musical vision. The tension came to a head when Harrison wrote Dream Away for the closing credits, and the lyrics contained some very pointed messages. Lines like greedy feeling, wheeling dealing, losing what you won, and all you owe is apologies were Harrison's direct commentary on how Gilliam had treated him and O'Brien during the film's creation. The song essentially accused Gilliam of being unbending, arrogant, and owing people apologies for his difficult behavior. The most surprising part of this story is that Gilliam didn't even realize the song was about him when he first heard it. Years later, he recalled enjoying listening to Dream Away without understanding that George Harrison had embedded his grievances right into the music. When Gilliam finally discovered the truth, he found it both funny and brilliant that Harrison had chosen such a subtle and artistic way to express his disappointment. The former Beatle felt strongly enough about the situation that he wanted acknowledgement from Gilliam, but the director never apologized. As a result, Handmade Films and Terry Gilliam never worked together again after Time Bandits, despite the film's commercial success. Fact 2. Sean Connery. From a script joke. One of the most unusual casting stories in Hollywood history happened completely by accident when Terry Gilliam and Michael Palin were writing the script for Time Bandits in 1979. When they reached the scene where young Kevin meets the legendary King Agamemnon in ancient Greece, they needed to describe what this heroic warrior king should look like, so they wrote a joke into the script itself. The stage direction read, "The warrior took off his helmet, revealing someone that looks exactly like Sean Connery, or an actor of equal but cheaper stature." It was meant to be a throwaway gag for the production team, a way of saying they wanted someone with that kind of commanding presence and masculinity, but obviously they never expected to actually get Sean Connery himself. Somehow, through a series of events that still seems almost impossible, the script ended up in Sean Connery's hands. To everyone's complete shock and delight, Connery actually read it and expressed genuine interest in playing the part. His agent reached out to the filmmakers to discuss the role, and it turned out that Connery was a huge Monty Python fan who loved their absurd sense of humor. The joke description in the script apparently amused him rather than offending him, and he saw it as the kind of self-aware, playful filmmaking he wanted to be part of. But there was a catch. Sean Connery was one of the biggest movie stars in the world at that time, and his usual salary was far beyond what the small Handmade Films production could afford. However, Connery's enthusiasm for the project led to an unusual arrangement. He agreed to work for a nominal fee, essentially a tiny fraction of his normal pay, in exchange for a share of the film's gross profits instead. This turned out to be a smart deal for everyone involved, since Time Bandits became a massive box office success, earning over $42 million in the United States and Canada alone. Even more remarkably, it was Sean Connery's own idea to appear again at the end of the film as one of the firefighters who rescues Kevin, and he also suggested that Agamemnon should perform magic tricks for the boy during their time together in ancient Greece. Fact 3. The invisible barrier scene was real anger. One of the most memorable moments in Time Bandits happens when the group of dwarves turns on their self-appointed leader Randall, played by David Rappaport, attacking him through what appears to be an invisible barrier. The scene feels intense and genuinely aggressive, and according to director Terry Gilliam and co-writer Michael Palin, that's because the anger on screen was completely real. The other actors weren't just performing, they were expressing their actual frustration with Rappaport, who had made himself deeply unpopular during the production. David Rappaport believed he had been cast in the role purely for his acting ability and refused to acknowledge that his size had anything to do with getting the part. While this might seem like a matter of pride, it led to some difficult behavior on set. Rappaport kept himself completely separate from his co-stars, refusing to socialize with any of them between takes. He also constantly demanded close-up shots that focused solely on him, which frustrated both the other actors and the crew. The tension built throughout filming as the rest of the Time Bandits cast, including Kenny Baker, Jack Purvis, Malcolm Dixon, Mike Edmonds, and Tiny Ross, grew increasingly irritated with Rappaport's attitude. When Terry Gilliam and Michael Palin noticed this real-life friction developing among the cast, they decided to use it to their advantage. Instead of trying to smooth things over, they actually wrote the invisible barrier scene specifically to channel that genuine animosity into the film. The result is a moment where the other bandits genuinely retaliate against Randall's leadership, and you can feel the authentic emotion coming through the screen. Gilliam later revealed in interviews that he appreciated the tension because it added a layer of realism to the group dynamics, making the Time Bandits feel like a genuinely dysfunctional crew rather than a perfectly harmonious ensemble. The invisible barrier became a perfect metaphor for the real walls that had formed between Rappaport and his fellow actors during production. Fact 4. Ralph Richardson red-inked God's dialogue. When legendary British actor Sir Ralph Richardson was cast as the Supreme Being in Time Bandits, he didn't just take the role seriously. He took it upon himself to ensure that God was portrayed with the proper dignity and authenticity that such a character deserved. Richardson was considered one of the greatest actors of his generation, and according to those who worked with him, he seemed to genuinely believe he understood what God would and wouldn't say or do. This conviction led to some fascinating behind-the-scenes moments during the film's production that left director Terry Gilliam both amused and impressed. Richardson received his script and immediately began making his own editorial changes, marking up the pages with red ink wherever he felt the dialogue didn't ring true for the character. Next to certain lines, he would write notes in the margins stating simply, "God wouldn't say that," as if he had direct insight into the Supreme Being's personality and speaking style. Gilliam later recalled being amazed by Richardson's confidence in these edits, noting that the actor seemed to possess an almost spiritual certainty about how God should be portrayed on screen. Rather than being offended by the changes, Gilliam found himself fascinated by Richardson's approach and often deferred to the actor's instincts. Beyond the dialogue, Richardson also became deeply involved in determining what God should wear in the film. He had extensive discussions with Gilliam about the costume, insisting on choosing just the right three-piece suit that would be appropriate for the character. In interviews included on the Criterion Collection release of the film, Gilliam fondly reminisces about how particular Richardson was in selecting the clothing, treating the wardrobe selection process with the same gravity one might expect from someone preparing to meet actual royalty. The result was Richardson's memorable performance as a proper, slightly befuddled English businessman version of God, complete with the perfect suit that Richardson himself had approved. Fact 5. Gilliam nearly killed Shelley Duvall. During the filming of the Sherwood Forest sequence in Time Bandits, director Terry Gilliam made a decision that nearly resulted in tragedy for actress Shelley Duvall. The scene required the Time Bandits to jump off scaffolding and land in a carriage where Duvall and Michael Palin were sitting as the characters Pansy and Vincent. Gilliam had built the scaffolding specifically for this stunt, and when it came time to film, he needed to show his actors exactly how to perform the jump safely. The actors were understandably nervous about leaping from such a height, so Gilliam decided to lead by example and demonstrate the stunt himself. What happened next was anything but safe. Gilliam climbed to the top of the scaffolding and jumped off to show his cast how easy it would be. However, instead of landing safely around the actors as he had instructed them to do, Gilliam landed directly on top of Shelley Duvall. The impact was severe. He caught her headpiece and cracked her neck in the process. According to Gilliam's own account, he nearly killed her with this careless demonstration. The injury was serious enough that Duvall could have been paralyzed from the accident. Years later, Duvall spoke about the incident in an interview and described the lasting effects of Gilliam's mistake. She explained that while she wasn't paralyzed, the injury left her with chronic pain that never fully went away. She said there's a pain that comes through her ears to her eye and then goes away, a lingering reminder of that day on set. Despite the severity of what happened, filming continued, and Duvall completed her scenes in the movie. The incident stands as one of the most dangerous moments in the production of Time Bandits and serves as a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong on set, even when a director is trying to prove something is safe. Fact 6. The crew were called. Overtime Bandits. Making Time Bandits turned out to be just as chaotic as the time-traveling adventure depicted on screen, and the production schedule became such a notorious disaster that the film crew started calling themselves the Overtime Bandits as a sarcastic inside joke. What was supposed to be a relatively straightforward fantasy film kept running into delays, technical problems, and creative complications that pushed the shooting schedule far beyond what anyone had originally planned. Terry Gilliam's ambitious vision for the film required building elaborate sets, coordinating complex stunts with actors of different heights, and creating practical effects that would bring the various historical periods and fantasy sequences to life. Each of these elements took longer than expected to execute properly, and when you combined all of these challenges together, the production found itself constantly behind schedule. The crew members, who were working long hours day after day, trying to keep up with the demands of the shoot, started using the nickname as a way to cope with the exhausting circumstances they found themselves in. The name was particularly fitting because it played on the film's title while also highlighting the reality of what everyone on set was experiencing. Instead of bandits stealing treasure across time, these crew members were bandits stealing whatever time they could to finish scenes, often working well past their scheduled hours. The delays weren't just inconvenient for the crew's personal lives either, because every day the production ran over budget added financial pressure to a film that was already being made on a relatively modest budget of $5 million. Despite all the scheduling chaos and the long hours that earned the crew their unofficial nickname, the cast and crew managed to pull together and complete a film that would go on to become a beloved cult classic, proving that sometimes the most difficult productions can still result in something truly special. Fact 7. Non-swimming actors did dangerous Titanic stunts. When the Time Bandits find themselves aboard the doomed RMS Titanic in one of the film's most memorable sequences, the production decided to have the actors perform their own stunts as the ship sank and they tumbled into the water. What made this decision particularly dangerous was that several of the actors playing the dwarves couldn't actually swim, yet they did the stunts anyway, putting themselves in genuine danger for the sake of the film. The Titanic scene was filmed using only one actual set, with the rest of the ship created using stock footage from other films, but the water sequences were very real. When the ship begins to sink in the movie, the characters fall and splash into the ocean, and those were the actual actors hitting real water without the safety net of knowing how to swim. The production didn't have the elaborate safety measures or stunt coordinators that would be standard on a modern film set, so these performers were genuinely risking their lives for a scene that lasts only a few minutes on screen. Adding to the chaos of the sequence, there's a darkly comic moment right before disaster strikes when Randall, the leader of the group, orders a drink with plenty of ice, completely unaware that they're about to experience the Titanic's infamous collision with an iceberg. The actors performed these dangerous water stunts with minimal safety equipment, relying on the film crew to pull them out if anything went wrong. This kind of risk-taking was more common in early 1980s filmmaking, but it's still shocking to learn that actors who couldn't swim were expected to fall into water and thrash around convincingly while cameras rolled. The dedication of the cast to Terry Gilliam's vision meant they were willing to put themselves in harm's way. And fortunately, despite the danger, no one was seriously injured during the filming of the Titanic sequence, though it easily could have ended in tragedy. Fact 8. Kevin's bedroom predicted everything. One of the most ingenious details in Time Bandits that many viewers miss on their first watch is that Terry Gilliam actually placed visual clues throughout the main character's bedroom that foreshadow every single adventure in the film. If you look closely at 11-year-old Kevin's bedroom in the opening scenes, you'll notice it's packed with toys, drawings, and models that prophetically mirror everything he encounters during his journey through time and space. The walls of Kevin's room are covered with pictures and posters of historical figures and mythical scenes, including images of ancient Greek warriors, Napoleon, and Robin Hood. These aren't just random decorations chosen by the set designers. Each one corresponds to an actual historical figure Kevin meets later in the film. On his floor, Kevin has scattered toy knights and cowboys, which directly foreshadow the film's climactic battle scene, where warriors from different time periods, including medieval knights and Wild West cowboys, materialize to fight against evil. Perhaps the most striking example is the miniature puppet theater sitting on Kevin's dresser, which looks remarkably similar to the actual puppet show that Napoleon watches in the film when the Time Bandits first encounter him. Even more impressive, the fortress that serves as evil's lair in the final act is constructed from what appears to be giant Lego blocks, matching the actual Lego pieces visible in Kevin's bedroom at the beginning. This attention to detail wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate storytelling choice by Gilliam and co-writer Michael Palin to blur the line between reality and imagination. The filmmakers wanted audiences to question whether Kevin's entire adventure actually happened, or if it was all conjured from his own imaginative mind, using the objects and images that surrounded him in his everyday life. This visual foreshadowing technique adds an extra layer of meaning to the film, suggesting that Kevin's bedroom essentially served as the blueprint for his entire adventure, with every element of his fantasy world having roots in his real surroundings. Fact 9. A mystery dwarf, credited but never shown throughout Time Bandits, the characters occasionally mention someone named Horseflesh, making comments like, "Horseflesh would never get us into this mess," during their various misadventures through time. If you stick around for the end credits, you'll actually see Horseflesh listed among the cast members, which makes it even more puzzling that this character never properly appears in the film itself. This wasn't an accident or an editing mistake. It was a very deliberate decision by director Terry Gilliam and writer Michael Palin, and the reason behind it is surprisingly practical. The published screenplay for Time Bandits includes an entire paragraph explaining the mystery, and it comes down to a simple concern about legal trouble with Disney. According to the filmmakers, if Horseflesh had actually been included as a full character in the movie, that would have meant 7 dwarves traveling together, which would have brought immediate comparisons to Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. The last thing Gilliam and his team wanted was to deal with potential lawsuits or accusations of copying Disney's most famous fairy tale, so they made the creative choice to keep the number of visible Time Bandits at 6 instead of 7. But the filmmakers genuinely liked the name Horseflesh, so rather than completely abandoning the character, they decided to keep him as what the screenplay calls the Mystery Dwarf. The character exists in references and gets credit at the end, but he remains invisible throughout the actual story. In a 2002 interview featured on the DVD extras, Terry Gilliam mentioned that there is actually one brief moment where Horseflesh appears on screen. He's the dwarf seen with the villain Evil in one scene, though the film never identifies him by name or gives him any dialogue. In the original script, Horseflesh had several lines, including one where he says, "The map, Evil One, the very map I promised you, is yours." But all of these were ultimately cut during production, leaving him as nothing more than an inside joke and a credited ghost. Fact 10. Lost Spider-Women footage. One of the most intriguing mysteries surrounding Time Bandits is a fully filmed sequence that audiences have never seen and likely never will. During production in 1981, Terry Gilliam and his crew shot an entire scene featuring two elderly Spider-Women characters named Myrtle and Beryl, who knit massive webs to capture passing knights in the Time of Legend section of the film. The sequence was completely finished with full makeup, costumes, and an elaborate set covered in giant spider webs, and black and white production stills from the shoot still exist, showing the actresses in their Spider-Woman makeup standing in the elaborate lair that was built for the scene. The Spider-Women sequence was actually written into the original script by Gilliam and Michael Palin, and Gilliam later described it as a marvelous scene that worked beautifully when they filmed it. However, during editing, the filmmakers realized they had a problem. The sequence required additional connecting scenes on either side to properly transition from the giant sequence to the Fortress of Ultimate Darkness, but by that point in production, the budget had completely run out. Without the money to film the necessary bridging scenes, Gilliam made the difficult decision to cut the entire Spider-Women sequence from the final film, even though the footage itself was perfectly good. In 2011, Gilliam spoke at the Bradford Film Festival in the United Kingdom and confirmed what many fans had long suspected. He stated that he believes all of the cut footage from Time Bandits, including the complete Spider-Women sequence, is now lost forever. Despite the film receiving multiple special edition releases over the decades, including restorations from Criterion Collection, this deleted scene has never surfaced. All that remains are the script pages describing Myrtle and Beryl's web knitting trap and a handful of black and white photographs showing what might have been one of the film's most visually distinctive and bizarre sequences. Fact 11. Japan censored the dark ending. When Time Bandits was released in Japan in 1983, 2 years after its original release, audiences saw a very different version of Terry Gilliam's fantasy film. The Japanese distributors cut approximately 13 minutes from the movie, making significant changes that completely altered the tone and message of the story. The most controversial cut was the film's dark ending, where Kevin's parents discover a piece of concentrated evil in their toaster oven and explode after touching it, leaving only their smoking shoes behind. This shocking moment, which perfectly captured Gilliam's dark sense of humor and his commentary on materialism and technology, was completely removed from the Japanese theatrical version. The distributors also cut scenes featuring Robin Hood and the ogre couple, along with other moments they deemed too intense or inappropriate for younger viewers. The decision to make these edits came down to pure commercial reasons, as the film was being marketed as a children's program in Japan, particularly at cinemas outside major metropolitan areas, where it was shown as a double feature alongside a domestic animated production called Harmageddon. The distributors wanted to sell Time Bandits as family-friendly entertainment and believed the original ending would be too disturbing for children, so they trimmed the runtime down to approximately 103 minutes instead of the original 116 minutes. This editing completely neglected the true intent of Gilliam's work, turning his deliberately unsettling fairy tale into something much safer and more conventional. The altered version played in Japanese theaters throughout 1983, and many Japanese audiences had no idea they were watching a heavily censored cut. The last scene was eventually restored when the film aired on Japanese television in 1988 on a program called Sunday Western Movie Theater, and every home video release in Japan since then, including Laserdisc, DVD, and Blu-ray versions, has featured the complete original cut. However, for years, Japanese moviegoers who saw Time Bandits in theaters experienced a fundamentally different film than audiences elsewhere in the world. Fact 12. They jumped into black velvet. One of the most memorable visual effects in Time Bandits is when the characters leap through time holes, seemingly vanishing into thin air as they travel from one historical period to another. The effect looks surprisingly smooth for a 1981 film, with the actors appearing to drop straight through portals into complete nothingness. But the secret behind this illusion was remarkably simple and low-tech. Instead of using expensive special effects or complicated camera tricks, the actors were actually jumping into large pieces of black velvet fabric that had been strategically positioned below the camera's view. The velvet's deep black color and light-absorbing texture made it photograph as pure darkness, creating the perfect illusion of a void, leading to another dimension. This practical effect solution was typical of Terry Gilliam's approach to filmmaking, where creative problem-solving often replaced big-budget technology. The velvet technique allowed the actors to perform the jumps themselves without requiring stunt doubles or elaborate rigging systems for most scenes. The cast would literally leap off platforms or through doorways, landing safely on the velvet below, which cushioned their falls while appearing completely black on film. The camera angles were carefully chosen to hide the edges of the fabric and maintain the illusion that the characters were dropping into actual time portals rather than just falling a few feet onto soft material. For scenes where the bandits and Kevin appear to be falling through the sky between time periods, the production used a different technique involving miniature figures instead of live actors. These small-scale versions of the characters could be filmed against different backgrounds to create the sensation of tumbling through space and time. But for the actual moment of jumping into a time hole, that black velvet remained the go-to solution throughout filming, proving that sometimes the simplest movie magic is the most effective. Fact 13. Kenny Baker's death scene was strategic. One of the most emotional moments in Time Bandits comes late in the film, when Fidget, one of the time-traveling dwarves, is suddenly killed by a falling beam during the climactic battle against evil. It's a shocking death that hits viewers hard, but what makes this moment even more interesting is that the writers chose to kill off this specific character for a very calculated reason. Fidget was played by Kenny Baker, who's best known for bringing R2-D2 to life in the Star Wars films, and Baker had a long-standing comedy partnership with another actor in the Time Bandits cast named Jack Purvis, who played the character Wally. The two performers had worked together for years doing comedy routines and had developed a genuine friendship and professional chemistry that went far beyond this one film. When Terry Gilliam and Michael Palin were writing the script, they knew they wanted one of the bandits to die during the final battle to raise the stakes and show that evil was a real threat, but they had to decide which character would meet this fate. According to interviews about the film's production, the writers specifically chose Kenny Baker's character Fidget because they understood the real-life relationship between Baker and Purvis, and they knew that Jack Purvis would be able to deliver an authentic and powerful emotional reaction to his friend's death on screen. This wasn't just about good acting, it was about capturing genuine grief and loss between two people who actually cared about each other. The strategy worked exactly as the filmmakers hoped, because when Fidget dies in the movie, Wally's reaction feels completely real and heartbreaking. Jack Purvis wasn't just pretending to mourn a fictional character, he was tapping into the real bond he shared with Kenny Baker, which gave the scene an emotional weight that would have been much harder to achieve with actors who didn't have that kind of history together. It's a somewhat manipulative filmmaking technique, but it resulted in one of the most genuinely moving moments in the entire film. Fact 14. Disney rejected it and regretted it. When Terry Gilliam and Michael Palin finished writing Time Bandits in 1980, they needed a distributor to get their quirky fantasy adventure into theaters. Disney was one of the first companies offered the film, and considering the movie featured a young boy going on magical adventures through time with a group of unusual companions, it seemed like a natural fit for the studio that had built its reputation on family-friendly fantasy films. However, Disney executives took one look at the script and passed on the project entirely, turning down what would become one of the most successful independent films of the early 1980s. The decision reportedly caused significant frustration within Disney itself, as many people working at the studio recognized the film's potential and couldn't understand why their executives had rejected it. The movie had everything that should have appealed to Disney's sensibilities, including imaginative world-building, historical settings, and a child protagonist, but the darker elements and unconventional storytelling apparently didn't align with what the studio wanted at the time. Instead, the film ended up being distributed by Avco Embassy Pictures in the United States, while Handmade Films, the production company founded by former Beatle George Harrison specifically to support Monty Python projects, handled the financing and production. Disney's rejection turned out to be a massive miscalculation. Time Bandits opened at #1 at the box office when it was released in November of 1981 and remained in the top spot for 4 consecutive weeks. The film was made on a modest budget of just $5 million, but it went on to gross $36 million during its initial theatrical run in the United States and Canada alone. When it was re-released the following year, it earned an additional $6 million, bringing the total to $42 million domestically, making it one of the most profitable films of 1981 and the 13th highest-grossing film of the year in North America. Fact 15. All deleted scenes are permanently lost. Time Bandits originally contained several sequences that were filmed but never made it into the final cut, and according to director Terry Gilliam, all of that deleted footage has been lost forever. When Gilliam spoke at the Bradford Film Festival in the United Kingdom in 2011, he stated that he believes all the cut footage from the film has been destroyed, meaning fans will never get to see these missing scenes that could have added even more bizarre moments to an already strange movie. The published screenplay for Time Bandits contains several black and white production stills showing scenes that don't appear in the finished film, giving us tantalizing glimpses of what was shot but ultimately abandoned. One of the most significant deleted sequences involved Kevin waking up in the middle of the night to find his bedroom completely flooded with water, and then watching in amazement as a full-sized pirate ship sails directly through his window. This scene would have been an early indication that something extraordinary was happening in Kevin's world, setting up the strange adventures to come, but it was cut entirely from the theatrical release. Another major deleted scene showed the Time Bandits attempting to rob a bank in 22nd century London, taking their thieving operation into the distant future rather than just the past. This futuristic heist sequence would have added another time period to the film's already packed journey through history, but like the pirate ship footage, it was removed during editing and the footage has apparently been destroyed. The script and a few photographs are all that remain of these ambitious scenes that never made it to audiences. The loss of this footage is particularly frustrating for film historians and fans because Time Bandits was already a production that pushed boundaries with its imaginative set pieces and special effects. These deleted scenes represented even more of Terry Gilliam's wild creative vision, showing just how much material was actually filmed before the final version was assembled. Unlike many modern films that preserve deleted scenes for home video releases, the Time Bandits footage is simply gone, making the published screenplay and production photographs the only evidence these sequences ever existed at all.